of the Islamic Society Committee, I'd like to give each one of you a warm welcome to our annual Discover Islam Week, which we're holding to break down the barriers and build the bridges. Break down the barriers that have been built by misinterpretations, misconceptions, and misrepresentations about Islam, which merely means peace through submission to God. And in place of these barriers, we hope to build bridges. Bridges that connect Muslims to people of other faith and to people of no faith, allowing us to connect in a healthy manner, develop mutual understandings, create strong bonds, look beyond our religious and ideological boundaries, and celebrate our shared humanity. Because in Islam, we believe that if somebody is not your brother in faith, then they are your brother in humanity. As part of Discover Islam Week, we are honoured to host a variety of knowledgeable speakers, each of whom will be discussing current and relevant topics, which we hope you will be able to reflect upon, learn from, and enjoy. Today we are delighted to host Khola Hasan, who will be focusing on the topic Misogyny in Islam, a Misconception. Okay, tomorrow we'll be hosting the event Conversations with Muslim Converts, where one of the guests will be Jamal Richards, founder of Deen Riders, a Muslim biker group who raise money for charitable causes. On Wednesday, our very own Sheikh Abid, the Imam at York Mosque and Islamic Centre, will be giving a talk on jihad, misconceptions and truths, touching upon the real meaning of jihad and what it actually is. On Thursday, we will be holding a silent stand in Bandra Plaza in commemoration of the victims of the Chapel Hill shooting, where we plan to stand in line holding the names of the 3 victims, Dia Barakat, Yusuf Barakat, and Razan Abu Salha. On Friday, we will be ending with a talk by Sharouk Naguib from the Department of Politics, Philosophy and Religion at Lancaster University, who will be discussing the topic of Islam and the Arab Spring, Revolution or Reform. So going back to today's event, Khola Hasan, our speaker for today, is a writer, broadcaster and public speaker. Her first book, entitled The Crumbling Minarets of Spain, was written at the age of 17, was later published in England, and then translated into Arabic and Urdu in foreign countries. She holds a Master's in International and Comparative Legal Studies from SOAS. She is currently Director of Albatross Consulting Limited. This is involved in research and outreach programs on issues related to Muslim women, especially human rights, forced marriages, education, and Islamic law. She is an executive member of the East London Free Faiths Forum and is involved in scriptural reasoning with St. Ethelberger Centre for Peace and Reconciliation. She is also a broadcaster for television and radio. She is a regular contributor for Radio 4's Beyond Belief series of programs and a debate that she took part in 2005 with Irshad Manji on the subject of women in Islam, later won the Sony Gold Prize for Best Speech Programme. She also took part in one of the renowned Doha debates on issues of equality for women. Finally, if we could please invite Sheikh Abid on stage to recite some verses from the Holy Quran, who will then be followed by Khola Hasan.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ويستفتونك في النساء قل الله يفتيكم فيهن وما يتلى عليكم في الكتاب في يتامى النساء اللاتي لا تؤتونهن ما كتب لهن وترغبون أن تنكحوهن والمستضعفين من الولدان وأن تقوموا لليتامى بالقسط وما تفعلوا من خير فإن الله كان به عليما وإن امرأة خافت من بعلها نشوزا أو إعراضا فلا جناح عليهما فلا جناح عليهما أن يصلحا بينهما صلحا والصلح خير وأحضرت الأنفس الشح وإن تحسنوا وتتقوا فإن الله كان بما تعملون خبيرا ولن تستطيعوا أن تعدلوا بين النساء ولو حرصتم فلا تميلوا كل الميل فتذروها كالمعلقة وإن تصلحوا وتتقوا فإن الله كان غفورا رحيما وإن يتفرقا يغن الله كلا من سعته وكان الله واسعا حكيما صدق الله.
Thank you for the beautiful recitation, Sheikh Abid. And if now, without further ado, we could please invite on stage Khola Hasan for the talk Misogyny in Islam and Misconception.
Thank you very much. Is that okay? Can everybody hear me? Yes, no? Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in ila yawmiddin wa ba'd. Mine is a very unenviable job these days. For the past 20 years I've been lecturing on the role of women in Islam. And Muslims love to talk about how many rights Islam gave women, the right to own property, the right to divorce, the right to free consent in marriage. Sadly, the perception of Islam and Muslims and the reality of the Muslim world is very far from the idyllic role of women that we like to portray as Muslims. The reality is that the Muslim world treats women pretty badly. And for the past 20 years, thinkers like myself have been trying to improve the situation because the non-Muslim world has a very, very low opinion of Islam. Everything and anything to do with Islam, everybody has a pretty low opinion. There's a lot of ignorance. And my job right from the beginning was to try and dispel the ignorance about Islam among non-Muslims. Over time I realized that it wasn't non-Muslims that were the problem, it was Muslims who were so ignorant of their own faith that they needed to be taught first. And the reality today is that we have a massive organization called Boko Haram in Nigeria who have brought back slavery, who are kidnapping women, who are forcing them into slavery, who are raping them, who are selling and buying them. And if anybody has seen the film 12 Years a Slave, which was, I was very upset when I watched it. I found it so upsetting that human beings are capable of doing this to each other. It's bad enough that we treat animals badly, but to treat other humans like that was atrocious. And to think that that is what is happening in Nigeria right now, where Muslims wish to bring back slavery, it's just horrific, it's inconceivable. And then ISIL, Iraq, Syria, possibly Libya now, extending their power base. Their Al-Khansar brigade produced a manifesto on women a few months ago, this has been translated. And it's very interesting because this manifesto on women is how women will live in their perfectly perfect Islamic state. And I went through that, and there were a few things that I just wanted to talk about. Their first point is that women should stay in the house and look after children, and that is it. That is the only role for them in life. They are good at it, only they can give birth, only they can nurse a child, and therefore their whole life should center around the children and the home, and they should stay basically locked up in their homes. Second point was the education of women is incredibly important in Islam, and they are providing free education for girls, starting from a very young age and going up to the grand age of 15. At the age of 15, education stops because they must get married straight afterwards. during those 10 years of wonderful education, they're not allowed any access to secular education. It has to be religious only, because secular education is a waste of time. Thirdly, they have to be married by 16, although 9 years is perfectly acceptable as an intermarriage. Fourthly, they are not allowed to leave the home to work, except if they are desperate, for whatever reason, if they can be useful to the society, and the only two jobs available to them are teachers and doctors. But given that they've only been to a religious madrasa for 10 years, I'm wondering how they're going to produce doctors and teachers. And the last point they make is that men have the body and the brains to work and have a career, so they should go out and work, whereas women have neither the body nor the intellectual capacity to work, so they should shut up and stay at home. Now, these beliefs about the role of women are not new. Traditional societies throughout the world have had that kind of a very demeaning attitude towards women. Even in Europe, it was only a couple of hundred years ago that the suffragettes were tying themselves to Westminster and demanding rights to be allowed education, to be allowed access to higher education, to be allowed to enter medicine, law, politics, were completely denied to them, to be allowed to vote, to have equal pay, to have maternity leave, to have maternity pay. It's very, very recent. In Europe, one of my favourite authors when I was at school was George Eliot, and it was a shock to find out that George Eliot was a woman called Mary Ann Evans, who had to publish her novel under the name of a man, because that was the only way she could be taken seriously. If it was a woman, well, she didn't know what she was talking about, all she can talk about is romance. So, the world is moving on, and women today are enjoying, throughout the world, including the Muslim world, rights and privileges. Just as men dream, so do women. Just as men wish to, hone their skills and to succeed and to study and to plan the summit of whatever profession they have, so do women. And throughout the Muslim world, we're seeing a huge rise in women who have entered the workforce, who are voting, who are active in the public sphere. But we are now getting Muslims who are saying this is against Islam. And we have to go back to a traditional conservative Islam, which does not allow any of this. And the problem is that the backlash of this insanity is hatred for Muslims. The Islamophobia that is increasing across Europe, across America. We just had the murders of 3 young people in America. A lot of people don't realize that the biggest targets of terrorists, whether it's Muslim terrorists or non-Muslim, are Muslims. 88% of people who die in terror attacks are Muslims. Across Nigeria, Libya, Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Pakistan, it is Muslims who are being slaughtered on a daily basis. So we are the biggest victims of the terrorists, and then we have to countenance the rise of Islamophobia across the world. And it's actually quite a frightening place to be in, to be a Muslim. It's quite a frightening place to be in. So does Islam have that kind of role in mind for women? And you will hear of 2 voices in Islamic history. You will hear the voice of God and of the Prophet, peace be upon him, who are desperately trying to take women out of caveman era. And then you have the voice of desert Arabs struggling with the emancipation of women, wanting to take them back to a pre-Islamic era. Those are the 2 voices that emerged in the beginning of Islamic history 1400 years ago and are still there today. And Muslim women are still struggling between those 2 voices, and it's about time Muslim women made their voice heard. The cosmologists of Islam, people like Muratha, have spoken about the Tao of Islam, who have spoken about the yin and the yang in Islam, who have spoken about the complementarity of men and women, that both are wonderful in their own right, that men and women are different, and that difference should be celebrated. Islam has never had any truck with asking women to ape men, and that's one of the problems. As a result of the feminist struggle, one of the problems that emerged was this desperation that women should behave and think like men, only then will they be successful. And that created a backlash within Muslim society because they wanted to celebrate the difference between men and women. and the fact that both together, working together, both have weaknesses and both have strengths, working together achieve a better world for everybody. What does the Quran say? There is no gender-specific role in the Quran. The Quran talks about different kinds of people. One of the most beautiful stories in the Quran is a celebration of femininity and virtue and goodness, and that is the story of Mary, Mary, mother of Jesus, in Arabic, Maryam. The story starts with her mother. Mary's mother is a pious woman. She is not named. She is a descendant of Imran, who is a religious man in the children of Israel. And she is expecting a child. She's incredibly devout, and she wishes to dedicate this child to the temple. In the temple, the grand priest is Zachariah. Zachariah in the Quran, Zacharias in the Bible. And she wishes to dedicate her unborn child to the temple, which was quite a common practice. And she made this vow that my child will be brought up from the day that he is born in the temple and will dedicate his life to the temple. When the child was born, she got a shock because it was a girl. And generally girls are never dedicated to the temple, it was just boys. So she's very troubled by this, and she said, oh, I was expecting a boy, but I have a girl. And God Almighty comments in the Quran, just 3 words. He says, وَلَيْسَ الذَّكَرُ كَالْأُنثَى. The male is not like the female. There are different genders. However, the way we take this verse, there's no negativity here. What God is saying to her is, yes, the male is very different to the female. In this case, you have an astounding female who you are going to entrust to the temple. And history shows that. Maryam, Mary, mother of Jesus, grows up in the temple to be a virtuous, good, decent, profoundly devout, very close to God young girl. She has never rebelled. She does exactly what God wants her to do, which is to dedicate herself to worship and prayer and learning and scholarly learning of religious tracts. She's incredibly good and pious. And when she has this child, Jesus, what is amazing in the Quran is Maryam is never addressed as the mother of Jesus. Maryam is Maryam. There is a whole chapter called Maryam, and that's it. She has no other names attached because she is such an incredible person that she needs no other name. She is Maryam. Her son, Jesus, is addressed again and again in the Quran as Isa ibn Maryam, Jesus the son of Maryam. She is a character in herself, but you, Jesus, remember that you are her son. So that respect for Maryam is profound in the Quran. And it is a message from God, I believe, a very strong message, where he is saying, it is not the gender that is of issue. Stop getting wound up about gender. It is what the person does with their lives that is the issue. It is what you achieve in your life. It is what people remember you by. It is the heights that you attain to that people will remember you by, not what your gender is. And that is the voice of God in the Quran that has been lost in the Muslim world. That is a tragedy. And it's very, very difficult for me as a Muslim to see Muslims talking about the role of women as if the beginning and the end and the middle is rearing children, and that women are incapable of doing anything else. The male-female relationship in the Quran is amazing. It is love and compassion. It is about sexual pleasure. The Quran is very, very clear. Well, the Quran doesn't go into that much, a little bit of detail. Prophetic narrations, the hadith, are much clearer than on this, and the later jurists, the fuqaha, talk about this quite extensively, which is that marriage is basically the foundation of Islam, Islamic society. And it is about sexual companionship. It is about men and women enjoying a sexual relationship in which both are satisfied. And in fact, a woman, if she applies for a divorce because her husband is impotent or because he does not fulfill her sexually, she will get that divorce immediately. Because the basic reason for marriage is for sexual companionship, and if the husband can't give that to her, well, she can walk. So love, cooperation, and harmony is what the Quran talks about. I'll read one verse to you in English. It says, many women who are believers, they are protectors of one another. They encourage good, they forbid evil. They establish prayer, they give charity, they obey God and the Prophet. On them God will have mercy, as he is mighty and wise. I absolutely adore this verse, because it is the basis, the cornerstone of men and women's relationship in society, in the family, in the Muslim world. Men and women are protectors of one another. There is no slave-master relationship. They are both helping each other to fulfill their potential. And yet we will see later that the voice arises in the Muslim world, and it is a very loud voice, that men are the protectors, the guardians, the masters, and women are the slaves, the owned. But God doesn't say that. It says men and women are protectors of one another. They take care of one another. They encourage good and they forbid evil. Both of them have a civil obligation. They have an obligation to society. They establish prayer. In Islamic language, establishing prayer is not praying 5 times a day. It's establishing the mosques, the institutions, the morality that allows people to pray. And both men and women have been given that obligation. They establish prayer, and yet throughout the Muslim world, there are many mosques that will not allow women to even enter. There are many mosques that do not allow women to enter the mosques. They give charity. Men and women give charity. If a woman is not allowed to work, in fact, one of the things that this manifesto of Al-Ansar Brigade said was that we have a massive charity fund, and there were pictures on their manifesto of queues of women in all black queuing to get charity from men sitting at tables. And this was something to be proud of, that women whose husbands are in prison or have gone to war or are dead or abandoned them, they can go and get charity. Yeah, fair enough, Islam has no problem with that. It is the duty of the state to provide for people who can't provide for themselves, but I would like to see those women provide for themselves, to be given the opportunity, where their husbands are not around, to be able to go and get a job, to get an education. They don't deny that. So if the husband's not around, they become charity cases, dependent on the state, and I find that so insulting. The Quran is explicit. They give charity. You only give charity if you've got money which you've earned. But the women are being denied that. They obey God and obey the Prophet. Both of them have a role in worship. It's not that the men worship and the women sit at home. Both are out there worshipping God, and on them God will have his mercy. Islam's development is very interesting because it came at a time of pagan society, idol worship, desert Arabs. People are affected by the climate in which they live. It's a very harsh climate in the desert. There were a lot of warring tribes. Survival was by killing and fighting and taking prisoners. And in that kind of milieu, women were treated generally rather badly. And Islam came, and as quite slowly, it tried to bring piecemeal changes to society and to the mindset of people. You can't just introduce laws. You have to change the mindset of the people so they can accept those laws. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, for 23 years, spent 23 years trying to change the mindset of the Arabs so they could accept the new changes. The fact that women had to give consent when they got married. The fact that if a woman wished for divorce, she could have it. The fact that when a man died, often men had many, many wives, the wives were inherited by their stepsons. And if a man did not marry his stepmother, she had to pay him money to get out of that contract and then marry somebody else. Girls were buried alive. There is a story of a man who came to the Prophet with tears in his eyes, and he said, Ya Rasulullah, I don't know what to say, but when I was a pagan a long time ago, I had too many daughters. And in that culture, if you had sons, it was something to be proud of. If you had daughters, it was something to be ashamed of. I was ashamed I had so many daughters. And I finally decided that I was going to do what a decent man does, which is bury my daughter alive. So I took her out into the desert, and I walked up with her. And she held my hand. And I got her into the middle of the desert. I had a spade, I started digging. And I was digging, and I was digging, and I was sweating. So my daughter got a handkerchief out, and she started to wipe my brow. She showed me so much love, and yet I carried on digging, and then I put her in the hole, and then I filled her up until her hands stopped moving. What makes a man so harsh, so vicious, so uncompassionate that he can do that to his own daughter? That was the kind of society that Islam came in, There were a lot of changes to be made. And it wasn't just law, it was changing the mindset of the people. And some things were immediately stopped, such as burying girls alive, such as women being inherited, such as women not being allowed to divorce. But other things were peaceful. A woman came to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and she said, my husband is a very good man. The hadith narrations keep his name, Thabit, we don't mention her name. She said, Thabit is a very good man. He's a pious man. He takes care of me. But I'm not happy with him. There is an implication somewhere that he was not very good looking, and she didn't find him attractive, so she found that difficult. And she said, I'm worried I'm going to commit a sin. That's all. I'm just worried I'm going to commit a sin because he's not everything I wanted. And the Prophet immediately said to her, what did he give to you when you got married? It was a garden, wasn't it? And she said, yes, he gave me a garden as a gift. And the Prophet said to her, return the garden and I will end your marriage. He didn't prod and probe. He didn't insult her. He didn't say, oh, shame on you, you have such a good husband who's taking care of you, and you just want to leave him because he's not good looking and you don't find him attractive. No, he understood that this woman was at the end of her tether and she was afraid that she was going to commit adultery. And he allowed her to divorce. And that tells you about the confidence that Islam gave to these early women who were used to being inherited and being abused and being buried alive, etc. That they could come and ask. Another young girl came to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and she said, Ya Rasulullah, my father forced me into marriage quite recently, and I want to know, is he allowed to do that? And the Prophet said, no, he's not allowed to do that. I can annul your marriage here and now. And she said, no, since I got married, I realized it's not bad, he's a nice guy, I can live with him. However, the whole point about forced marriage, I want that to get out into the community, the fathers cannot force their daughters into marriage. So she, again, had this confidence to come and say, announce to the world that Islam does not permit forced marriage. And as far as I'm concerned, it's there in the text. And yet in Britain, the British government has had to set up a forced marriage unit. Taxpayers' money is being poured into it. Why? Because girls of Muslim background in this country are still being forced and beaten into marriages that they're not happy with. During battle, women did not get any shares of the spoils of war, the booty as it's called. And after one of the early battles that the Muslims took part in, the Prophet, peace be upon him, was handing out the spoils of war, which was your recompense for taking part in the war. You got the armor, the animals of the people that you had defeated. And the women didn't get anything because women did not get anything in spoils of war in those times. So the women didn't get anything. And everybody was quite happy, but the women came up to the Prophet and said, this is not fair. We actually participated in battle. And the men started to cheer. Muslim men started to cheer. They said, what did you do? We're the ones who were fighting. We're the ones on the horses. We're the ones with spears. We're the ones with bows and arrows. We're the ones who are killing people. We will get the spoils of war. You're getting nothing. Go away. And the women came to the Prophet and said, that's very unfair. Because we were the nurses. We carried the wounded out of the battlefield. We nursed them. We bandaged them. We took care of them until they were well enough to go back to battle. When people died, we picked them up and we carried them away. We were the ambulances, we were the nurses, we were the doctors, we brought you water. If it hadn't been for us, the army would not have been able to survive. We went to Medina, the city, and protected that, made sure that wasn't attacked. We did a lot, just because we weren't at the forefront of the battle. We did a lot. The Prophet was lost because he's got the women demanding their right, and the men saying, don't even think about it. Because in our pagan tradition, women do not get any spoils of war. God reveals a verse in Surah An-Nisa, the 4th chapter, where he says, for men what they earn, for women what they earn, do not be envious of each other. And from that day, women got spoils of war. So this tension is there. Umar, he is the second Khalifa, second Caliph of Islam. He's probably one of the greatest men in history, I think. He's an amazingly incredible man. He's a man. He's a man's man. He is a desert Arab, he is a warrior. He himself said when he became caliph, he said, oh God, help me because I'm very harsh. My stick is always next to my hip, he was fond of beating people that he was angry with. He said that I have this tendency, and I'm quite harsh, but please God, give me mercy, make me soft. So he was aware of that. And he noticed that women were going to the mosque, which they did at that time quite comfortably and happily. But they were, the mosque is a place of worship, it's a place of sedateness, it's a place of tranquility, it's a place of standing in front of God. And he noticed that the women were turning it into a party atmosphere. They were dressing up, and they were going as if they were going to a party. And he didn't like that. So he said, I'm going to stop women from going to the mosque. So he's got a good reason why he's doing it. His wife Abigail loved going to the mosque. She loved praying. And he saw her wandering up towards the mosque one day, so he went running up to her. What do you think you're playing at? I've just said women are not going to the mosque. Why are you going to the mosque? She said, the Prophet said, do not stop the slave girls of God from entering the mosques. I'm going, and there's nothing you're doing about it. He stayed quiet. Even though he was incredibly unhappy, even though he was preaching to other people to keep their women at home, he wasn't able to stop his own wife. The day that he died, he was at Fajr. Fajr is dawn prayer. It's a very difficult prayer to go to the mosque, for men rather than for women. And, we are told that he led the prayer when he was stabbed and died, and his wife Abigail was in the congregation praying behind him. So right after his death, she was there in the mosque. Once he saw his daughter Hafsa was married to the Prophet, peace be upon him. And one day he saw Hafsa being a little bit mouthy, complaining about something to the Prophet. He got very, very angry. He said, called her, he said, don't you dare talk to the Prophet like that. If you want anything, ask me, but don't trouble the Prophet. And he got very annoyed about it. Immediately Salama says to him, how dare you? Who do you think you are? We don't come and tell you what to do in your home life, don't you dare come and meddle in our home life. If we're not going to talk to our own husband, who are we going to talk to? So you can see that the early Arabs are desperately trying to control their women, and the women are fighting back, because they have been given that confidence by Islam to do so. When I was about 10 years old, my father told me a story which I will never forget. He told me the story of a man who lived in Mecca in the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him. He had two children. He had a son called Darar and he had a daughter called Khola. And this man was known for his skills with the sword. And not just wielding a sword is hard, wielding a sword on horseback is even harder. You have to control both the sword and your horse. So he used to take his son Darar out into the desert to teach him how to fight on a horse with a sword or a spear in your hand. And he had a daughter called Khola, so he took her with him. He didn't ask her to sit at the back and make the coffee. He didn't ask her to sit at home and make the sandwiches. He took Khola with him to the desert. And he trained both son and daughter in the skills that were needed to fight, which was the way he survived in those days. Many years later, the son Darar was taken captive in the Battle of Yarmouk. And Khalid bin Walid is one of the most famous Muslim generals. He noticed one person completely covered, because imagine you're in the desert and you're on a horse and you're flying through the desert on this horse. The horse is going to kick up a lot of dirt, a lot of dust, a lot of sand. It's going to go straight on your face and your eyes. So men and women wore a headscarf like mine that covered the whole face, including the eyes, to protect themselves. So it's very common. And the Tuareg nowadays in the Sahara, they still dress like that. The men cover their faces just as the women do. That is actually the beginnings of the covering of the face. So this one person, lone rider, was on a horse, face covered, darting into the enemy, fighting, killing a few people, and then coming out again, taking a breath, and then getting back into battle. And Khalid thought, what is this? You fight as a body. Under my command, you don't go off in your own fight. So he sent the other soldiers with him and said, go and get that young man. What's he playing at? What he's doing is not safe. He's going to get killed. I want him behind me, not on his own. And they came back and said, that man's not coming. He said, I insist. I want to see that man here next to me. So they went and got the rogue soldier to come back. And when the rogue soldier came up to Khalid bin Walid, he said to him, what do you think you're playing at? Who are you? And what do you think you're doing? And a voice said, and it was a woman's voice, I am Khola. I am the sister of Darar. My brother has been captured and I'm trying to get him back. And Khalid was amazed. He said, well, he didn't say go home and fry samosas, please. He said, stay behind me. You will fight and we will get your brother back, but you will fight behind me, not on your own. And my father told me this story and he said, you've been named after her. And I thought, this is, when you're 9, 10 years old and you're told this story, you are told that you're allowed to fly, that you're allowed to do what you like. And for me, the tragedy is Muslim women are being denied that. So do I still pass the water, please? Not possible?
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
lots of my black bag.
Mama, circumvent my food.
Sorry about that. Islamic society has an amazing history of 1,000 years. Over 1,000 years of civilizations that we cannot even dream of today. If you go to Spain, if you go to Andalusia, if you go to Damascus, which has been shelled to its bare bones, you will see buildings, you will see universities, you will see palaces that the Muslims built that are still standing. And there is no building today that we can build in London with all our wealth and all our power that can compete with those standing buildings. They created institutions, they created universities, they created roads, they had street lights when Europe lived in darkness. And they did this through a confidence of their faith, which allowed them to work with women, with religious minorities, with people who disagreed with them, because they didn't have a problem with it. The Muslim rulers, the civilizations that they created, had no problem with working with everybody. If you go to the great Alhambra in Spain, you will see written in the walls, carved into the stone by hand, the only one who will attain supreme power is God. And that is carved all over the stones, but at the same time there are little carvings of crosses and stars of David. Because the Jewish and Christian artisans were working with the Muslims to build these great mosques and these great palaces and these great universities. And the Muslims didn't have a problem with that. They were absolutely confident that their faith allowed them to work together. And women contributed immensely. A lot of the women were very rich. And although they didn't go out and physically labor, they used their wealth to create a society. These women were very, very visionary. They were amazing women. Harun al-Rashid is a very famous king of the time. His wife, Zubaydah, is amazing because she went for the Hajj from Syria, from Damascus to Mecca in Arabia. And she was a queen. She had this huge entourage. She had, hundreds of soldiers and camels and horses and food and water and animals for feeding, for eating, etc. She had everything she could think of, and yet she struggled because there was nothing en route. And it was a very, very tough journey. So when she came back, she thought, I'm a queen and I have struggled. What about ordinary people who don't have that kind of wealth, who don't have that kind of help? I am going to build a road that goes all the way from Damascus to Mecca. And I'm not just going to build a road, I am going to line it with wells. And I'm going to line it with little hostels, so that people who are traveling can stop and get free water and somewhere to stay where they can rest and pray. And she ordered that these be done. She ordered an underground system of taps and pipes be laid to feed these wells. And the people came back to her and they said, this is impossible. It's such a massive journey. It is such a long trek. And you want a road, you want continuous supply of fresh water. It's going to cost a lot. It's just going to cost a lot. And she said, even if each spade that you stick into the ground costs you a gold coin, just one spade going into the ground costs you a gold coin, do it. Those are her words, do it. Before Nike or Adidas or whoever nicked it, she amended, just do it. I want it done. I want that. And it was laid. The pipework was laid, the water was laid. Hundreds and hundreds of years. It survived, and the well of Zubaydah is to be found somewhere outside Mecca still to this day. The women created, well, this was already created by Islam, but the women flew with this, and that was the system of waqf. Waqf in Islam is an amazing concept where you have a a farm or a cafe or a hotel, something that generates income, something that is able to generate income forever. And generally it was farmland, trees, fruit trees, but it was also hostels and places like that where people would stay and buy food. So you have a building that is, or a farm that is generating income. Next door to it is a college, a university, a madrasa, a place of learning. And the point is that the money that is generated, the revenue that is generated, goes straight to the place of learning. So that the scholars, the students, the teachers are not dependent on money from outside. They get money from the wealth. And this was an institution created by Islam, and the women of the Umayyad era, the Abbasid era, the Mamluk era, this great civilization that was created, they flew with this. Whoever had money built a lot. They built something that would generate income, and next to it was a college, a university, a library, a madrasa. And so for over 1,000 years, Muslim scholarship was not dependent on outside money. That was the key to it, that they should be independent, that they should be able to not worry about money, not worry about the state paying them, have their own access to income, and be able to think. And that's what the scholars did. That is the amazing history of Islam, that the scholars were thinking. They were able to do ijtihad, which is their legal reasoning, and to take the faith. They needed to keep Islam relevant to every society. That was the beauty of this. They thought, they discussed, they investigated, and they kept Islam relevant for all society. We have a wonderful Palestinian mufti in the 18th century. His name is Khola bin Ramli. And a case was brought to him where he is asked that this woman has a husband who is incredibly evil. He beats the daylights out of her. He is physically very abusive. He's divorced her many times. Under Islamic law, if you're divorced 3 times, you cannot live together at all. You cannot remarry. You have to completely separate. Marriage is not to be taken lightly. So the rule of 3 divorces is very, very important. And he has divorced her umpteen times, well over the 3, but he won't leave her alone either. What can she do? So they brought it to Khola bin Ramli, and he looks at this and he says, he's not allowed to live with her. If she can prove that he has divorced her more than 3 times, he cannot live with her. And they said, yes, but he's an evil man. He's just not listening. He's refusing to separate. And Khola bin Ramli said, tell her to poison him. This is in the books of the Ottoman period, in the books of the muftis of the Fatawa. Poison him. Because if what he is doing is a sin, he's beating her, he's forcing her to stay with him, if he's not listening to anybody, he needs to die. Another case was brought where a man had beaten up his wife and had broken her teeth. And Khalid immediately said that he has to pay her the compensation that is for teeth, whatever. She can either punch his face and break his teeth, or he has to pay her financially. But the point is, he treated it as a criminal case. He didn't treat it as civil law, he treated it as criminal, and only in criminal law do you have criminal liability where you have to pay an indemnity. And yet today I was reading an article that was in the Telegraph about a Muslim woman, a Bengali woman who died in London in 2011. She was a victim of terrible domestic abuse for 12 years. She went to all sorts of people for help. She went to her GP, she went to various authorities, she went to her local counsellor, and everybody ignored her. And the title of the article was something like, my aunt was a victim of domestic abuse, but the authorities thought that is normal in Asian society. That's the title of the article. The authorities in this country, in Britain, in England, in London, felt that, well, she's Asian, and that's part of Asian culture, domestic violence. No, it isn't. But how do I try and tell non-Muslims that? How do I tell Muslims that? This is not part of our faith or part of our understanding of Islam. So the 2 voices that I'm talking about, the voice of God and the Prophet, who said one thing, and a lot of Muslims over the centuries, not all, a lot, unfortunately they've got the dominant voice who are saying something completely different. One is the concept of fitna. Fitna in Arabic means temptation. And people like, the people in Nigeria, the people in Iraq and Syria, ISIL, those kind of people, they have an obsession with the seductive powers of women. That is all a woman is capable of, seducing everybody. When she opens her mouth, when she shows her face, when she moves her hands, when she walks, when she goes out to work, when she shows her face in public life, she is seducing men. The poor woman is trying to earn a living. But for some reason, they're obsessed with this seductive power of women. And that is the reason why they want to lock women away and throw away the key. And that is nowhere in the Quran. The Quran has the use of the word fitna. It says, إِنَّمَا أَمْوَالُكُمْ وَأَوْلَادُكُمْ فِتْنَةٌ. Your wealth and your children are a temptation. Your wealth and your children will lead you away from God's path. Women are not mentioned anymore. In fact, women are the subject of this sentence as much as men are, because women have wealth and children. But unfortunately, it has become an issue of power throughout the Muslim world. I'm not sure how much longer I've got. How much longer have I got?
I think the train's at 8:05, so we want to leave it around 7. We want to end around 7:25.
Oh, okay.
Right now it's 7:05.
Okay, so
We've got cake up.
we've got Q&A as well, but I'd like to finish with an important verse from the Quran. This is Surah An-Nisa. It's a very long verse. If you don't know it, it has a name, generally. It is not a name given by God, or the Prophet, or the Muslims, but this is the name given to this verse. It's called the beating verse. Okay, so very exciting. Men are the protectors of women, because God has made one of them excel the other, and because they spend from their means. Therefore, righteous women are obedient, and they guard in their husband's absence what God orders them to guard. As to those women on whose part you fear ill conduct, admonish them, refuse to share their beds, beat them lightly. But if they return to obedience, seek not any means of annoyance. This is, as I said, the beating verse. This is the verse that has been used to demean women through the ages in Islamic history. I find this a very beautiful verse. Sadly, probably. But it's a beautiful verse. And the way it has been translated and understood is the problem. And that is why domestic violence is allowed in Muslim society. And that is why a judge allowed a Muslim man who had beaten his wife to walk away free, because he felt that in your culture, this was in Denmark or somewhere recently, the judge felt, well, you're a Muslim and your faith allows you to, therefore you can walk free. Probably the next time he comes back to the court, it will be because the wife is dead. But the court wasn't prepared to go forward with this. Men are the protectors of women. This is the issue. What is God saying? I find this beautiful. As a mother who went through a horrendous time having children and pregnancy and pain and everything that goes with it, I find it beautiful because God is saying to men, you take care of these women. You get a woman pregnant, you don't walk away. You are going to take care of her. You're going to take care of the family. You're not just going to give them money and then walk away or done my job or project to the post. You're going to stay there, you're going to protect them. You're going to protect both the woman and your children. So that is the way I see. I think it's an amazing order. It's a commandment to the men that you have a responsibility to society. And the beauty of this is that in Islam, women have been given the choice. And we see that. I've talked about, Zubaydah, I've talked about Khola, I've talked about, there are many other women in Islamic history. Aisha, one of the Prophet Hasan, is famous for being a huge scholar. A quarter of the Islamic law is attributed to her alone. And she never had children. So what Islam is saying, as I understand it from the Quran is a complete book. It's a complete package. It's not isolated verses, and that's the problem with these literalists and these Puritans, is that they take piecemeal verses and don't know what they're saying. Well, I think the Quran is one book and one message, because it's from one God. So when you look at the whole message, what God is saying is that women can do what they like. If they want to have children, they can have children. If they don't want children, they don't need to have children. If they want to be scholars, they can be scholars. If they want to be warriors and go and beat people up, they can do that. He's given them that choice. Men haven't been given the choice. Men have been told, you have to provide. If a woman wishes to provide for her family, she can. If she wants to stay at home, do the knitting, look after the children, have a lovely life, she can do that. Men can't. Men have been ordered that you are responsible financially and to protect, to take care of the women and family that comes with it. So that's the first bit, and that's the one that has not been introduced in Islamic history. Early on, the scholars looked at it and understood this as financial responsibility. Over time, sadly, Islamic scholarship began to look at it as inherent abuse of power. That men are better, they are stronger, and then it became they're intellectually superior, they're physically superior, they're morally superior, And slowly the trajectory of the debate in Islamic scholarship goes from men have to financially support their women to men do it because they're better than the women. They are better because they're economically better? No. Because they're intellectually better, because they're morally better, they're psychologically better, they're physically stronger, etc., etc. And that is the kind of trajectory that you can see now in Boko Haram and ISIL and the Khan Sabiyin and all the rest of it. They've got to that understanding, which is not from the Quran. The Quran is very much about take care of the families and don't walk away from the responsibilities. And the last bit is, again, look at the context. You are talking to men who bury their daughters alive. You're talking to men who inherit their mothers, their stepmothers. You're talking to men who don't divorce women, they just take another wife. So if they're unhappy with this woman, they don't allow her to walk free. No, you just sit in your own home, I'll just take another wife, I'll be happy. And that's how polygamy became completely unchecked. And that's what Islam tried to do, check polygamy. In that context where women were beaten like slaves, in that context, God is telling them what to do when the marriage falls apart, because that's what it's talking about, a marriage falling apart. And it gives you steps of marriage resolution. And the first one is separate, the first one is talk to them, admonish them, talk to them. You know, I work as an assistant judge in the Sharia Council. And one thing I notice when I'm dealing with, when I'm mediating between couples who don't get on and who are close to getting a divorce, is that they are talking but nobody's listening. They're screaming at each other but nobody's hearing the other. And my job as a mediator is to force them to listen. And more often than not, sadly, it's the men who are not listening, because women are good at talking. So they're doing what we're talking, the men just aren't hearing, it's not going in there. So I have to force them to sit down and actually I have to stop the woman and say to the man, did you hear what she just said? And did you actually take it in? Did you hear with your heart what she just said? And he'll say, yeah, I got that. And she'll say, well, I've been saying it for 30 years, where were you then? So that is the first step. Get these damn creatures to listen to each other. In another verse in the Quran it says, whenever there's a problem in the marriage, bring mediators in. So it forces the couple not to just talk to each other, but get somebody in, an outside party, a third party. So that's the first step. And then the second step is, don't share the bed. When you're beating each other up, then you shouldn't really be sleeping together because it just doesn't make sense. And women should not be used, because that's where marital rape comes in, where she's saying, well, I'm not happy with him, then why would I rather sleep with him? So the Quran says, just separate, walk away from each other, give each other space, it's both of you. And then they're getting really wound up. Imagine the pagan Arabs, warriors on horseback with a sword in their hand, who used to beating up their wives. They're getting wound up. I want to punch my wife when she annoys me. And what Islam is saying, and what God is saying in this verse, which I think is so amazing, is He's saying, okay, you want to punch your wife? I'll put it in, but it's going to be at the end. It's going to be at the end of a whole system of marriage resolution, and I'm confident you'll never get to that. Because if you have followed the earlier steps, where you are talking to each other, where you have got outside mediators in, where you are spending time through mediation, and then if it doesn't work, if it works, we're back together. Yes? If the mediation works, we're back together. If the mediation doesn't work, we separate. What does that mean? Divorce. So you've either got back together, or you have divorced. Where is the violence coming? There's no space for it, there's no time for it. So it's there to make the men feel good. Yes, you Arabs, you want to beat up your wives. It's there, but you're not going to get to it if you do it properly. That is the way I understand this verse. Unfortunately, as I said, I don't think Muslim society have understood God's command the way it should have been understood. I'm going to stop there to allow you to ask any questions about listening.
Thank you for the talk, Khola. Definitely something which all of us, inshallah, can reflect upon and learn from. And opening the floor up to questions if anybody's got any, hopefully. Come on, guys, it takes one person to start off with a question, then a million are going to come out. So just one brave person to start off. Yep, we've got a sister here.
I wanted to ask, how have you dealt with, misogyny? I was a Muslim woman as well. How have you dealt with issues that you might have faced in your career as getting where you are now? Especially in the Sharia law, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of courts as well who are culturally minded and not Islamic. And they don't even allow female leaders. How have you dealt with the difficulties of getting where you are?
You need a strong personality. A big mouth. It's been tough. It's been very, very tough. I mean, I work as an assistant judge. I'm a pretty good judge. I do a very good job. My clients are very pleased with my work. I can't call myself a judge. I have to call myself an assistant judge, simply because the libido of the men is upset, and they feel insulted, and possibly they feel a little bit challenged for the first time in their lives. So I have to keep myself slightly quiet, low key. I keep myself very low key. So it has been difficult, but you know, the two voices I was speaking about, you know, God's voice, the voice of respect and equality and giving women opportunities, and the voice of, oh no, knock them off and throw away the key, are there in the Muslim community. Both of that very, very strongly. And I work with both voices. I work with people who give me an incredible amount of respect, and see that, you know, I've got a little bit of training what I'm talking about, and I've got some interesting stuff to say. And I've got as well, as I say, she's a woman, she hasn't got a clue. Shut her up. So I've got both those voices. Alhamdulillah, you know, in Britain especially, there is a rise, you know, of God's voice, of people who are trying to understand. May not understand it totally, but still trying to understand. So there is hope. There is hope. There's a lot of women demanding their rights, which is exactly how the Quran, you know, sees it. Women get up and ask. You know, God says in the Quran, Allah does not change your condition until you change your own condition. So if Muslim women want their rights, they have to get up and be noticed. And a lot more women are doing that. Unfortunately, outside events, ISIL and the rest of it, are really, you know, the work I've been doing for 20 years, I just feel as if the rug's been pulled under my feet because I have to start all over again. It's been quite tough. But there is hope.
So we've got time for a few more questions, so anybody else? Come on, this is such a controversial topic, there must be someone with a question.
What would you all to see?
Nora, brother, yeah, Iran, yeah, go for it.
How do you see, like, what kind of possibilities for, like, reform do you see of, like, as you put it, like, giving power to God's voice over the traditionalist voice?
Yeah, I mean, you know, people say that I'm a feminist, I'm liberal, and I get quite offended because I see myself as very conservative. And I see conservative Islam, which is God's voice, as being the perfect voice. And the problem is that, you know, what people are saying to us, I remember somebody saying to me that you need a reformation in the Muslim world the way the Christian world, Europe, had a reformation. And I was really offended because the reformation in Europe led to the church's power completely declining and the secularist voices gaining power. And I don't want to see that in the Muslim world. I want God's voice and the religious voices to stay strong, but they need to know what they're talking about. And I think a lot of religious voices don't know what they're talking about. So do we need reform? We need to reform the mindset of Muslims. That's what we need. You know, I'm not prepared to throw away 1400 years of scholarly tradition. It has incredible value. One of the things that we Muslims understand when we've done ijtihad throughout the centuries is that you have to look at the socio-economic context, the cultural context in which the Quran was being revealed to people it was being speaking to, and we have to be able to interpret the Quran as a living book of law. And that it's relevant to me today as it was 1400 years ago to the Desert Arabs. And when I read the Quran, as if God is talking to me, because He is, that's what He's doing, He's talking to me. So when I read the Quran, when I teach the Quran, I teach it as something that God has given to me, and I have to teach it to the people. And I can see that God's voice doesn't need any reform because it is so relevant in every aspect. It's just trying to get that message across. And I think the mindset of a lot of Muslim men, not all men, but a lot of Muslim men, is still quite Bedouin Arab. And it needs bringing up to date. And when you bring it up to date, you find it is actually very close to the Quran. You go back 1400 years. It's quite amazing. So it is just about people getting out there and speaking. And not being frightened into submission. And not saying, okay, we'll shut up because people don't like what we're saying. We know we have to say it. That's what we need. We need Muslim thinkers who are... I mean, one of the things I wanted to say, but I forgot to mention, is that the Waqf tradition that Muslim women set up It was a colonial experience, sadly, which destroyed the Awqaf. It was the British in Palestine, it was the French in Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia. Throughout the Muslim world, the Awqaf were destroyed by the colonialists. And a waqf cannot be sold. It cannot be taken by the state. It is, permanently, forever, in the hands of the religious institution to which it is attached. But when the colonial masters came, they destroyed the waqf and they basically confiscated the land. So the ability for scholars to be completely independent and to be able to think for themselves and to talk about a law that is relevant for modern times, that disappeared because they lost the money. That was one of the issues. That is one of the tragedies of the colonial experience. It destroyed the ability of Muslim scholars to think independently forever. We've lost that. A lot of Muslim scholars throughout the Muslim world are dependent on the state for funding. So they say what the state wants them to say. And because of that, they lose respect within their own communities because they're not independent. That's a huge problem. So we're not going to get that back. We've lost that. But we need people who are thinkers, deep thinkers, who know their text really well, to be out there. And keeping this relevant, that's the important thing, to keep the Quran relevant to all times, not to live as if we're still living in prehistoric Arabian. Does that answer your question?
Unfortunately, we've really got time for one more question before Khola has to rush off back to London and somebody's going to bag it, so go ahead.
Is it not dangerous to allow free interpretation of a book that is commonly the source of people's knowledge? Is it not allow people to justify their own biases?
Anybody who interprets the Quran has to have a certain element of level of learning. It's not, there's a beautiful saying of the Prophet upon him, that the Quran is an ocean without banks. It is an ocean without banks. And the first time I heard this, I sat down and I thought, I really need to understand this because it sounds amazing, but I don't know why, so I need to understand it. And when I thought, I realized that if you go to the seaside to swim, you will have different types of people at the seaside. Some people sitting on the sand, just saying, oh, it's lovely, but I'm not going into it because I'm scared. Others will dip their toe in it and go, oh, it's cold, and run away. Others will go up to their knees, fill up the trousers, go up to their knees, run away. Others will swim, and they'll go and swim. And some will swim a few yards, some will swim miles. Others will say, I'm not swimming, I'm going deep sea diving, and they will go below. And they will go below and they will see things that nobody else is going to see that's sitting on the bank. So there are different levels of enjoying the sea. Yes? And those who are scuba diving, those who are deep sea diving, I can see plants, we can see colours, we can see fish that nobody else is ever going to see. And for me, that is the Quran. The people are at different levels in their relationship with the Quran. There are people who just sit at the side and they read it in Arabic and they put it down and nothing went in there. They didn't even dip their toe in it. And there are others who understand a little bit and there are others who are swimming deep. And it is those who are swimming deep, they're the thinkers. They're the ones whose opinion counts. But the relationship of each person with the Quran is special. Because that is their ability. Everybody is different. The farmer is different to the doctor, to the lawyer, to the politician, to the dustbin man, whatever. Everyone's different. Everybody's ability to connect with the Quran is very different. So, a farmer will pick up this Quran, he'll see loads of references to gardening in that. And he'll find it amazing because there's so much to do with the natural world in that. The politician, the warrior, everybody will find something in the Quran that suits them. But the true scholar is the one who's able to go deep sea diving in the Quran. So, yes, everybody has a connection with the Quran, but those who are going to teach it, instruct it, are the ones who can deep sea dive into it. It's not about just making up our own opinion. You have to have some kind of continuity of tradition, that you understand what the Quran said, what the Prophet said, what Ibn Kathir said, what so-and-so said, and then be able to come up with something that keeps relevant to us.
Okay, our events coordinators has told me that we can fit in one more question. So, we really have to go for that. The man in the blue shirt.
Yeah, do you think that the Islamic world needs like a sort of a feminist movement?
The feminist movement has a very bad press in the Muslim world. In fact, if you read the manifesto of Al-Khalsa Brigade, that's what most of it. It's quite a long manifesto, and there's about what they're going to do, and most of it is just sliding off the Western world and the feminists. So feminism has a very bad press. For me, it's very important. There was a mosque that was just started up in America a couple of months ago, which is a women's only mosque. And it's just women lead, women pray, women sit, men are not allowed. I thought that was really sad. Everybody was saying to me, can you start one up? Can you start one up? I'm like, no way. That's not my way of thinking. Because for me, the Quranic verse about men and women cooperate together, build religious institutions together, make a better society for everybody together is important. I don't want to see, it is not a war between the genders. It has never been a war between the genders in the Quran or Islamic history. The war between the genders is a very recent innovation. And it is really in the last 200 years, since the colonials and the destruction of the Muslim empire, we've seen that. So, the feminist movement pitted women against men. They said things about lesbianism, they said things about castrating men. There's an awful thing about men. I don't want to hear that in the Muslim world. So, no, I don't think we need a feminist movement. Authority and voices are generally in men's hands, and I'd like to see the men who are capable of looking at the world through women's eyes, and I'd like to see more women of knowledge and intelligence and integrity speaking out for the Quran. But I really don't want to see it in this movement because the backlash from the men will be incredibly violent and it will just defeat all purpose.
Well, thank you, Khola, very much for your talk and your Q&A. I think there's definitely a lot of messages in there which a lot of us can learn on. I think, especially us as Muslim men, oftentimes we make the mistake of treating women unjustly just because we think we're allowed to. But I think the reminder from Khola is refreshing and well needed because it puts us back in our place as well. So I think it's great to hear. And the Q&A was also really good in terms of the answers. So unfortunately, Khola's got to get going now because her train is at 8:05 and it's a trek back to London. But yeah. Yeah, that's it. I'm getting a message which I'm not understanding, but that's the end of the talk today. Thank you, Khola, very much. And if you guys can just stay here for 1 minute, because I'll just tell you about the other events in Discover Islam Week. Tomorrow we've got conversations with Muslim converts. And then the reason we're holding that event is because oftentimes, you might think so much is being said about Islam in the media, or Muslims are terrorists, X, Y, Z. Why in their good mind would somebody want to convert to Islam? But tomorrow you guys get a question to actually ask the Muslim converts. When the faith is shown so badly in the media, why did they convert to Islam? Our event after that is on Wednesday by Sheikh Abid here on Jihad, Misconceptions and Truths. And I know I don't need to give you guys an introduction into that because of the title, you guys are just going to come to the talk. On Thursday, we're holding an event thank you. Yeah, on Thursday, we're holding an event in Vanbrugh Plaza in commemoration of the 3 Muslims that died in the Chapel Hill shooting. And throughout the week, we're collecting money for the 3 Muslims that passed away because in Islam we have a concept called Sadaqah Jariyah, and Sadaqah Jariyah is charity that God very mercifully rewards to a person even after they have passed away. So any money that we do wield, that's going to go towards building wells in poor countries where people can benefit from the water, and every time a person benefits from that water, the 3 Muslims that passed away in America who were killed unjustly, they will get rewarded. And I appreciate that if you're not Muslim, it might be difficult to understand this concept of getting rewarded after you've died. It's a continuation of their legacy. These people were so committed to activism, which in its sense is just a reflection of the character of our beautiful Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But you look at the life of Dia Barakat, who was a dental student. He put so much commitment into giving dental aid to Syrian refugees in Turkey. Razan Abu Salha, she used to work with the homeless in her community, feeding them. And this act is just in continuation of these beautiful people's actions. So please donate generously towards that. Thank you. And guys, there's also a load of free cake there, so please take as much as you want. Thank you.